quiet.
Hello, and welcome to TEDxKLB 2021 Interactive Partner Series. And this is the Demystifying the Laws and Legal Processes that Impact Black Communities session. My name is Judge Laurel Beatty Blunt. I serve on Ohio's 10th District Court of Appeals, and I'm here with my colleague and good friend, Judge Jaiza Page, who is a judge on the Court of Common Pleas in the General Division. And we are here to share our experiences and insights regarding the justice system.
Thanks so much for allowing me to join you, Judge Beatty Blunt. It's a pleasure, and always good to see you too.
You too.
So I have a question. You very frequently talk to the community, especially the Black community, helping them to understand the justice system here in Ohio and how things work. So can you talk to us a little bit just about the different court systems and what you do, and even share what I do as well?
Sure. Okay. So if you all thought of the justice system in Ohio as a pyramid, and I am a Delta, so that is a natural sign for me to make. But anyway, so on the bottom layer, you have what's generally referred to as the trial courts. Those are considered municipal court, common pleas court, which has two divisions, a general division, three divisions, a general division, a domestic relations and juvenile division, as well as a probate division. And then you also have what's called the Court of Claims. And what happens in municipal court, you have civil cases where generally people are suing over money, where the amount in dispute is under $15,000. And then municipal court on the criminal side deals with misdemeanors. And generally a misdemeanor is a crime that is committed where you can only be sentenced to under 6 months imprisonment. Now, where my friend Jaiza here sits and where I sat for 10 years is the Court of Common Pleas General Division. The General Division, civil cases, again, where people are suing generally over money, that's where the disputes are over $15,000. And actually, that's a pretty low threshold when you're talking about litigation. So Judge Page ends up dealing with everything from a neighborhood dispute over a driveway or a fence line to medical malpractice, where people say that a doctor did something to them that hurt them even more than they were already hurt. And then in the General Division, the criminal docket are felonies. So that is anything over theft of something valued over $1,000, all the way up to capital cases where the consequences that you could be put to death. Now, the probate division deals with some happy things. They're a different kind of court.
Yes.
Because they have marriage licenses. They also have adoptions. But they also have will contests and what's called involuntary commitments, where someone might be having mental health issues and their friends and family think that they should be hospitalized against their will. Now, the Court of Claims is just where you are suing the state of Ohio over whatever. That could be someone who is imprisoned in an Ohio prison saying that their rights are being violated, all the way to a construction dispute on the campus of an Ohio university. And so above that, then that's where you get to the Court of Appeals. And I sit on the 10th District Court of Appeals. So everything on that first level, if you don't like what happened there, you appeal up to the court where I sit. One of the biggest differences between the court where Judge Page sits and the court where I sit is that I sit in 3 judge panels. Judge Page's court is a lot closer to what you see on movies, what you see on Law and Order, not Judge Judy, because as she might be tempted to sometimes, there's no way you can talk to anybody like that.
No. Definitely.
Although I did tell someone that one time I wouldn't believe him if his tongue was notarized. But anyway, so I sit in 3 judge panels. So for me to affect the impact of a case, I have to have one other judge that agrees with me. And then the tip top of that pyramid is the Ohio Supreme Court. And one of the big differences between the Ohio Supreme Court and my court where I sit, although we're both appellate level courts, they get to pick the cases that they hear. And so they are more dealing with questions of law where 2 courts have come to 2 different conclusions on the same issue, or cases dealing with the Ohio Constitution. And so they get to pick the cases that they hear. And so oftentimes the law is decided on my level in the middle because the Supreme Court has decided not to accept jurisdiction over a case. So if you will, if you have municipal courts, more like your Judge Judy's, your People's Court for those of us who are a little bit older, night court, if you will, whereas Judge Page in the Court of Common Pleas is closer to law and order. Domestic relations is closer to our friend from Columbus that used to be on TV, Lynn Toller. And then where I sit is closer to like hot bench. And, I know in our courtrooms, and especially when we're campaigning, because all state court judges in Ohio are elected, we see firsthand all of the misconceptions that people have about the justice system. And what are some of the ones that you see?
One thing I really want to talk about and that I see a lot of times is people not necessarily understanding the plea process and understanding that if you are taking a plea, as we say, that you are waiving your constitutional trial rights. And so as I'm going through the various trial rights, which there are 6 that we're required here in Ohio to share, I a lot of times see some confusion on the defendant's faces. And so when I tell them that, do they understand that their right to appeal this conviction, they're waiving that if they plead? And so I can see that they're wondering, what does that mean? And the 6 trial rights, which you may have to help me as we're going through them. Or the first one is that you have a right to a trial by jury. And so if you are not happy with the offer that is given to you from the state, you have a right to continue to go to trial. You do not have to take that plea offer. And that trial could either be to a jury, which is a jury of 12 of your peers, or it could be to a judge, which is called a bench trial. You have the right to require the state to prove your guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, which, as Judge Beatty Blunt was talking about, that's when you see the law and order, when they're bringing in witnesses, they're bringing in the evidence that they believe will prove that you're guilty. You have a right to require the state to bring in witnesses, and then your attorney has the right to cross-examine them or question them. Another right that you have is the right to have witnesses come in and to testify on your behalf. And if they decide that they don't want to come in one day, then the court will send a subpoena and we will require them to come in. And I actually saw a case, it wasn't in my court, but where a young man was arrested on a warrant and he was brought in and required to testify. You have the right to not testify against yourself. And your final right, like I said, is you have the right to appeal, which if you were to appeal the conviction in my court, you would appeal that to Judge Beatty Blunt's court. So those are 6 constitutional trial rights that you have that are very important. And I think understanding those and weighing whether or not you do want to move forward with the plea or if you want to move forward with the trial is really important, because at the end of the day, this is a case that has been brought against you. And it is important that you are making the decision that is best for you and your liberties in a lot of ways. So those are some things that I see that I think it's important, particularly for our community to understand when they're in the courtroom.
And Judge Page, I remember when I was on your court and you had I was starting a trial with a Black defendant and called downstairs for jurors to come to potentially serve as jurors on this Black defendant's case. And I remember what it felt like when those doors opened and no Black people came in to be jurors.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to touch on the importance of Black people answering jury summons?
Absolutely. And this is something really that I've learned from conversations with you. When you get the jury summons, it is crucial that you answer that summons and that you come down to court. Because when there are individuals who are sitting at that defense table and they look like us and they look at that jury pool and they don't see anybody who looks like them, just imagine the thoughts that are going through their head. And I'm not saying that just because you have a jury that no one looks like you doesn't mean that you will get a fair sentence. But just imagine if you have someone who maybe had a similar experience to you and what that could do back in the jury room when they are deliberating. And so when we're the duty judge, we get to go down and talk to the jurors. And I've had African-American jurors who they tell me, I don't want to be here. I don't have anything to do with this. I don't want to be a part of this process. And just trying to explain to them the importance, not only really for our community, but again, for that defendant who is sitting there, what your one thought could do to possibly get a not guilty verdict if the person isn't guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
I agree with you wholeheartedly, because then it's can be so disheartening to then read about a trial or something in the paper or hear people criticize and say they were found guilty by an all-white jury. And then maybe like the next week, one of my friends calls me up and is like, Laurel, I got a jury summons. How can I get out of this? Mm-hmm. Number one, I'm never going to tell you. And two, it is just, I think the perception of justice is an important one. I think that it's also very important when they come into your courthouse, they have that wall with all the judges' pictures on there. And there isn't someone in Franklin County that's going to come into that courthouse and not see someone who looks like them. Right. So we have that part covered. But then when you get to the most important part, because keep in mind, it's the jury that decides guilty or not guilty. It's not the judge. So the rubber's meeting the road with the jury. And when someone who is a person of color has a jury with no one that looks like them, it can lead to unjustified fear and unjustified bias against the system.
Yes. And it's interesting. I've had a case before where the issue was concerning discrimination. This was a civil case, and I was the only person of color as a judge. And the attorneys on both sides were not of color, even the parties were not. And, just thinking about if there was no one of color in this entire courtroom hearing this case, what would the end result be?
Right.
So I think representation is so important. And I constantly encourage young people too, that we need young people who are going to be prosecutors, who are prosecutors of color. And it's not that you're working for the system or you're going against our people, but we need that perspective when you are someone who's going to prosecute these cases. We also need public defenders. We need defense attorneys who are people of color. We need more judges. And it's just really being a part of that process to, again, not only that representation, but just the different ways that we think. And I know that you were elected, I believe, like 3 years ago to the Court of Appeals, 10th District. But I just want to take this opportunity to let our community know that you were the first African-American female who was elected to that bench. And just to thank you for being a trailblazer. Thank you for the sacrifices that you make for us, so that not only myself, but young little girls of color can see someone like you in this position. And you are the highest judge in our community. I know Judge Terry Jameson has joined you on that bench as well. But thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you.
And there's another thing that I wanted to talk about that goes into sentencing and fair sentencing. And there is a group that is led by Chief Justice O'Connor, and we are both on it, that is really focused on ensuring that sentencing in our state and in our smaller communities and counties is fair. So can you talk a little bit of that and the importance of the database that is being introduced?
I think it's important, particularly for our community. And let me tell you what it is. What the initiative is that every judge in Ohio would use the same entry, or basically the same form, when they sentenced defendants in criminal cases. And information about the crime itself, about the sentence, as well as about the defendant, would all be collected in partnership between the Ohio Supreme Court and the University of Cincinnati. And what we will be able to glean from that, well, first of all, it's pretty astonishing that Ohio doesn't have that capability to collect that information in the first place, because the ripple effect of it is very broad. So, for example, when you start looking at what people are being sentenced to probation for, are they being successful? What type of programs are working? Those are the types of things that not only give judges good information, it also gives legislators who actually make the law good information. And then also, I think of importance for our community is that it will point out some sentencing disparities. Quite frankly, the way things are now, if you are in Pickerington, on one side of the street, you're in Franklin County, and on the other side of the street, you're in Fairfield County. And you can do the same thing on two different sides of the street and have completely different consequences. And so having that information will point out those sentencing disparities and particularly help our community. We just had an example of it up in Cleveland, where a white woman and a Black woman committed very similar offenses, except that the white woman stole more money than the Black woman did. Mm-hmm. But the white woman got probation and the Black woman didn't. And what a lot of people don't appreciate is that not only are those two different consequences for the same conduct, is that you have to consider that if you are imprisoned for any amount of time, it affects your job, it can affect your housing, it can affect your children. And then also, if you're labeled with a felony, the collateral consequences of that are vast as far as housing and particularly as far as getting a job. And so it is very important that we support those efforts to get some unified sentencing information here in Ohio.
And thank you so much for talking about that. I actually am kind of the pilot courtroom here in Franklin County in our Common Pleas General Division that has been inputting the information with my sentences so far in that database and compiling it. There are, I think, about 30 judges across the state who are participating, and it's with our purpose is to, one, introduce the rest of our colleagues on our particular court to it, but then to, again, share it across the state and to help, again, with those disparities that you were talking about from county to county, but then within the same court, because you can have two judges with, again, very similar situations, and one judge will give an individual probation and the other judge will impose prison. And I'm very excited about this project, particularly because of those disparities that we see and that impact communities of color, that impact communities that are economically disadvantaged. And, you know, when you think about, if I steal something in Fairfield County and I steal something in Franklin County, to go to prison because it was in Fairfield County and to get probation because it was in Franklin County, it just doesn't seem fair. Right.
And the difference of a crosswalk.
Right. And, you know, Judge Beatty Blunt and I are a part of this effort in different capacities, because she's on the court that reviews my sentences, and she's making sure that the sentences that we impose are fair and they are in accordance with the law. So she will not have to put anything into this database. But for us, I think that judges who are in the trial court level, it'll make you think about your sentence before you impose it and think about it the correct way. Another thing that we both always talk about is just the importance of voting, and particularly for judges. So do you want to talk about that?
Excuse me, judges, we have a question on how do we get resources allocated to navigate the legal system if we are stacked financially? What is the privilege to correct? What is it like to appeal to privilege to correct? This question is up there on the screen.
That's a great question. I think it's from Karen. And one thing I can think about, at least from the civil side, so you do not have the right to an attorney in a civil case. You do in a criminal case. Is that the Legal Aid Society of Columbus has a lot of resources for those who are of a certain economic level to help guide them through the legal process. So I know that they help individuals who have maybe concerns with domestic. I believe that they will represent you in that regard. They deal a lot with evictions, landlord, tenant rights. And so I definitely would suggest reaching out to them if it is a civil case, meaning that, again, it's not a criminal case. And if you want to talk about some of the resources on the criminal side.
First of all, I want to clear up one misconception that I think is pretty common, which is just because you have a public defender, sometimes people call them public pretenders, does not mean that they are a bad lawyer. And at the same time, just because you paid for a lawyer does not mean that they are a good lawyer. I have seen people give up good public defenders.
Me too.
And, they scratch up every penny that people in their family have and hire a bad private lawyer. So that's one thing, but it almost goes back to what Judge Page was saying before, and that do people even realize that in a criminal case, they have that right to appeal. And if they can't afford it, a lawyer does have to be appointed for them.
And I think that was a great point, that here, particularly in Franklin County, I think that we have great public defenders. And I've seen that too, where they will say, well, I need to get an attorney. And I say, you have an attorney. And it's just really those misconceptions, again, particularly in our community, that a public defender isn't going to represent me. A public defender isn't an attorney, but they have gone through law school. They are barred in our state, and they really do, I believe, do a great job here for our defendants. And if it is a case where you don't have the money to pay for an attorney, again, I think our public defenders here in our county are amazing.
That is to say, though, there could be more.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And, if you think about government, it all works together, right? And so when we start talking about there could be more resources, that's when you start talking about the Ohio legislature and Franklin County commissioners. Because while we impose sentences and make decisions about witnesses and evidence, they hold the purse strings.
Yes. Yes, they do.
And so, essentially it goes back to the importance of voting, but not only the importance of voting for judges, but people who impact the entire system.
Absolutely. And judges here in Franklin County are, I believe, on the ballot every year, but it's a different court this year, that there are judges on the municipal court who will be on the ballot. Next year will be judges in the common pleas and on your court as well.
Thankfully, not me.
Yes, and the Supreme Court. And it is so important to be educated. And something that you have said before is that people don't care who their judge is until they get in front of them. But when you are in that voting booth and when you want to know a little bit more about the judge before you get there, hopefully you won't get there. It's important to research them. It's important to understand their philosophies the best that you can, and to vote for someone who you believe is a part of your community, who understands the needs of your community, and who wants to be fair and impartial and unbiased on the bench. So I know we have a little bit of time left. Can you just tell us briefly, why did you want to be a judge?
I like conflict resolution. And I like that it's a job where any type of intellectual curiosity you might have, you're going to come across something. As a judge, if you think you've seen everything, if you think you know all the answers, then you should be nervous, because, I've been on the bench since 2009 and I'm still seeing new things. The law is constantly changing. For example, the way we sentence has changed just since you took the bench. And so I like how judges are the ones that take the law and solve the problems.
Absolutely.
What about you?
I think very similar reasons. And for me, I didn't necessarily always know that I wanted to be a judge. I knew that I wanted to be an attorney since I was 8 years old. And I always viewed judges in the highest regard, particularly in our profession, but just in the community. And then when I grew older and I began to see some of the obstacles that we face in the judicial system, I wanted to be a part of it, and I wanted to be a part of it in a different way, and to be, one of the individuals who was hopefully imparting fair sentences. And so I took really my passion and love for the law and researching, and then to be able to have a direct impact on someone's life, and that was being a judge. And so that was really why I decided to run and continue to do the work that I do.
I wanted to talk about something and get your opinion on something, Jaiza, and because we have such a unique perspective, particularly on the criminal justice system. And, I would tell people I have seen the police do some very questionable, one-time horrible things to Black people. And I have also seen the police save Black people.
Yes.
Both. I am not a law and order, lock them up and throw away the key person, but I'm also not let's completely trash the justice system person. I miss the moderate. And in sentencing, there were times when I was so happy to have the opportunity to give someone a second chance. And there were other times where I was sitting there adding up the numbers, saying, how long can I protect the public against this person?
Yes.
Do you agree with that? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. And it is, for me, I'm excited when we give them a second chance, meaning that we're generally imposing probation. And then when they come in for a miscellaneous hearing and they're doing so much better, you just see the changes that they made. But, one of the questions that's in the chat and question that I'm asked a lot too is just about the obstacle that we face as Black judges. And I think imposing prison sometimes when defendants look like us, because of what we have heard and that we see with men of color being disproportionately incarcerated, is an obstacle that we have to face that could be very different from our colleagues. And so how do we go through thinking what sentence is really appropriate? We are taking someone who is a father, who is a son, who is a member of our community that has hurt many times someone in our community away.
Yes.
And what is the proper time? We know that at the end of the day, if it's not a life sentence, they're going to get out. So how do you impose a sentence that's fair, that's protecting our community, because it's a place where we live, and also ensuring that this individual, hopefully, when they return back home, are rehabilitated? And, for me, really the prison sentences is one of the obstacles I think that Black judges have to view a lot differently, because too, the way that we are perceived in our community, because I had someone tell me, oh, you don't lock us up, do you? And I said, well, there's times that I have to, because it's what I'm required to do. And I go through the process and I may think of it differently, but I can't say, oh, I can't send this person to prison who hurt someone because they're a Black defendant. And so what are some of the obstacles that you have seen, particularly on your court, being the only person of color for some time and reviewing cases that come from the lower courts?
On Court of Appeals, a lot of times our hands are tied, because what we're doing a lot of times on Court of Appeals, we're just looking for error. We're just making sure that the trial court got it right. And so what we're doing a lot of times, we're not fixing it, we're just sending it back. I think another thing that's unique to Black judges, though, is we are not immune ourselves from prejudice.
Right.
I told you about the experience I had campaigning, where someone threw tennis balls at me and my volunteers and called me a nigger. when I first got there, my chambermate calling me a nappy-headed girl to other judges, other attorneys. So we are not immune to the things that other people face, but we still have to get it together and go out, put on that robe and go out there and be neutral.
Yes.
I've had someone sitting 2 feet away from me admitting that they're in the Aryan Brotherhood.
I have too. Mm-hmm.
And I am there to be the judge. And so, that is just, it's almost like a black tax. It's just an extra thing that we have to do, that white judges don't have to. And then, to your point about how we're seen in the community, if we're being honest, Jaiza, there's certain bars we can't go to anymore. Yeah. There's, because I will never forget the first time, my husband and I, we like to have a good time. And the first time someone was like, look at the judge and her husband dancing. And we're like,
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I got some stress to relieve. So even on a personal level, it could be, a little different.
Yes.
When I ran the first time, I was, a lot younger and a lot thinner and single. And, I'm trying to get somebody's vote and they're trying to get my number.
Oh.
And that's not necessary. That's unique to Black people, unique to being a woman.
Yes.
Running as a judge.
Yes, absolutely.
We have a question. How do you unpack and process the impact of these interactions that you're speaking of?
So it is something that I think, one, just having colleagues who you can talk to, and Laurel and I
was going to say, call Jaiza.
Yeah, we have to talk to each other a lot because it's an experience that is very unique to us because we are women and unique to us because we are people of color. And what I try to do is I just try to explain to everyone why I'm doing what I'm doing the best way that I can. And you really can't internalize it because if we do, we just don't know what can happen. And it's really having friends and family that you can talk to and understanding that we're not immune to racism because we wear a Black robe. We're just a Black person in a Black robe that people are wondering, how are you up there? How did you get there? Who's your dad? Who helped you? And it's like, they totally forget the work that we put into schooling, into ensuring that we have earned the right to sit where we sit. And it wasn't given to us by far.
Right.
And
because I would love it if you could just say, I'm Jaiza Page, I'm a Black woman. And the doors of Georgetown would just open up for you.
I know.
But I don't think that's how it worked.
No, not at all. Not at all. And so, I think it's really just having those relationships where you can talk to people.
It's because, first of all, there aren't many judges to begin with.
Right.
And then I think it's less than 6% of judges in Ohio are Black. And as you can imagine, they're all concentrated in Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Columbus.
Yes.
But then once you get down to Black women, there's still less than 10 of us.
Yes.
So it's important that we have those relationships. And it's because when I read the question, my knee-jerk reaction was call Jaiza or call Monica, as in Monica Hawkins, who sits on domestic relations court, because we are the only ones that can really know what happened to the other.
And one thing I am proud about is that I believe in every court here in Franklin County, we have judges of color.
Yes.
We have women of color in every court. I sit with Judge Kimberly Cocroft. We elected the first African-American woman of color to our Supreme Court the year that we were running as well, Justice Melanie Stewart. And Yvette McGee Brown really paved the way for her success in that way. So we have made some strides here in our state. Not enough, though, by far. If you know of anyone who wants to run for judge who looks like us, please encourage them to do so because it is really, really important.
Yes.
So I know that we are wrapping up now, and it's just been awesome being able to sit with you, my friend, and to talk about the work that we do and just really to help our community better understand, hopefully, the decisions that we make and the field that we work in. Thank you so much for joining TEDxKLB 2021, and have a great day.